Imagine a world where every book, every manuscript, every sacred text was painstakingly copied by hand. The flicker of candlelight, the quiet murmur of monks, the sound of quills scratching against parchment. This was the reality for centuries. Before printing presses, before digital media, the written word was a labor of love, a mission to preserve knowledge that transcended time. But what if I told you that the monks who dedicated their lives to this task, the monk copyists, were the true architects of the modern world we know today? Their work, often unseen and uncelebrated, laid the foundation for revolutions in art, science, politics and religion. In today's video, we're diving deep into the history of the monk copyists, their sacred duty, and how their humble task of transcribing texts changed the world. From the rise of the printing press to the Renaissance, the Reformation and beyond, this is the untold story of the monks whose ink-stained hands helped shape the course of human history. So grab a seat and let us journey back in time to explore the profound impact of the monk copyists and the legacy they left behind. Because in the end, the story of the monk copyist is the story of humanity's unbroken pursuit of knowledge. Imagine waking up before the crack of dawn. The cold of the stone cell grips you immediately as your eyes open, and a faint smell of dampness lingers in the air. It's as if the stone itself breathes the chill of centuries past into your bones. The bell tolls in the distance, echoing through the halls of the monastery, a summons to the day's first prayer. You shiver slightly, wrap your thin robe tighter around you, and sit up on the cold stone floor. Outside, the world sleeps. But not here. Not for you. There is no clock to mark the time, only the bell, the prayers, and the steady rhythm of life that has carried on for hundreds of years in this very monastery. You can feel the weight of the centuries on your shoulders, the knowledge that monks before you have toiled in these same rooms, copying these same sacred texts by hand, year after year. The routine is the same. The silence, heavy and thick like the morning fog, will surround you again today. This is the life of a monk copyist. You rise slowly, your body aching from the hard straw mattress that barely softens the cold stone. The monastery is quiet now, save for the faint sounds of monks beginning their morning routines in the halls. The candle flickers in the corner, its light struggling against the overpowering darkness of the room. You make your way to the scriptorium, your bare feet hitting the cold stone floor, the chill biting through your thin socks. The scriptorium is the heart of the monastery's scholarly work. It's a large, dim room with high stone walls, lined with rows of wooden desks. Each desk is simple, carved from rough oak and cluttered with parchment, ink pots and quills. The air smells of ink and old parchment, rich, earthy like the past itself. The stone floor is uneven and the cold radiates up from it, but here, within the four walls of this room, there's a sense of timelessness, a sense that no matter what happens in the world outside, this work must continue. The process of preserving knowledge through painstakingly copying every single word of sacred texts. It's an art, but it's also a labor, a sacred duty. You settle into your desk, the weight of the quill resting in your hand. You take a moment to prepare yourself, to center your mind. The work will be slow today, just like every other day. You open the large manuscript before you, the Psalms, one of the many books you have copied in your years here. You have memorized its pages, and yet you approach it again with reverence, knowing that each letter you form is part of something much larger than yourself. The candlelight flickers in the cold air as you dip your quill into the ink. The ink is thick, dark, and viscous, with a slight metallic smell. Your fingers tremble slightly as you begin to write. The first letter is a small act of creation. Each stroke must be perfect. You focus, letting the rhythm of the work soothe you, even as your back begins to ache. The work is quiet, but there is no silence. In your mind, you hear the faint scratch of quills, the soft rustling of parchment, the distant prayers echoing through the monastery halls. As the day moves on, the scriptorium fills with the soft sound of quills scratching on parchment. The hours stretch out, and yet, somehow, they seem to fly by. There is no clock here, only the steady rhythm of the work. You dip your quill again, your eyes scanning the manuscript. The candle flickers, casting eerie shadows across the stone walls. You are not alone in the scriptorium, though it feels that way. Other monks are at their desks, hunched over their manuscripts, writing in silence. Some are older, their hands more steady, while others are younger, their faces eager but tired from the day's work. There is little conversation. This is not a place for idle chatter, but every now and then a soft cough or a quiet murmur breaks the silence. In this work, there is no room for error. The ink must be thick enough to stay on the parchment, but not so thick that it clogs the quill. Every letter must be perfectly formed, no room for mistakes. A single wrong letter means starting over. And for this, you must be patient. The monks who work here, day in and day out, know this rhythm intimately. Their bodies ache with the years of repetitive motion, but they keep going, knowing that their work will last long after they're gone. The tools of the trade are simple, yet essential. The quill is nothing more than a hollowed feather, carefully sharpened to a fine point. The ink is made by hand, carefully mixed from soot, water, and a small amount of gum arabic to make it sticky enough to adhere to the parchment. The ink pot is an old, worn ceramic vessel, its rim chipped and stained with years of use. Parchment, the medium on which you write, is made from animal skin, usually sheep, calf or goat. It's scraped clean, stretched and dried before it is ready for use. It's a laborious process, one that takes several days to complete. The parchment is often rough and uneven, making it difficult to write on, but it holds the ink well. Each piece of parchment is precious. Once it's written on, it becomes a permanent record of the work, a physical representation of the labor it took to preserve knowledge. The monotony of the work is numbing, and the challenges of life in the monastery are many. The cold stone walls seem to press in on you from every side, and the silence of the scriptorium can be deafening. Your fingers ache from the constant writing, and your back protests after hours, hunched over your desk. But there's no room for complaint, no room for rest. The work must continue. Sometimes you wonder if this is all there is. A lifetime of copying words that others wrote centuries ago. A lifetime of silence, of cold stone, of ink-stained fingers and parchment that seems to multiply no matter how many pages you finish. And yet, as much as you long for rest, for a break, you know that this is your calling, this is your duty. The work of the monks is sacred. Without it, knowledge would be lost. Without it, the word of God, the teachings of the saints, the wisdom of the ancients would disappear, swallowed by time. And so, you continue to write. The quill moves across the parchment, the letters forming one by one. You don't think about the hours. You don't think about the aches in your body or the silence in the room. All that matters is the work. All that matters is the task at hand. As you continue to copy the Psalms, one thought nags at the back of your mind. Is this all there is to your life here? The endless hours of quiet labor, the repetitive task of forming letters one by one. You sometimes think of the monks who came before you, those whose hands once held the quills you now use. But among them, one monk stands out, and not for his devotion to the sacred texts. His name was Brother Cuthbert. His name is not widely known, yet his work endures. His manuscripts, still preserved in the Abbey's library, are filled with strange and whimsical drawings, doodles, jokes, and even the occasional cryptic note. It is said that Brother Cuthbert was a quiet man, a monk who spent most of his life in the scriptorium, copying sacred texts. But if you look closely at the margins of his work, you'll find something that might surprise you. Something that might make you wonder what went on behind the solemn walls of the Abbey. Brother Cuthbert was born in the early 1200s, a time when monasteries were the intellectual hubs of the world. As a child, he was quiet and reserved, preferring the company of books to that of other children. He entered the monastery as a young man, drawn not only by the religious life, but also by the promise of peace and solitude. His work as a monk was not extraordinary in its outward appearance. He followed the daily routines of prayer, labor, and copying manuscripts, just as every other monk did. But something set him apart. Brother Cuthbert had a sense of humor, an attribute rare in a world so consumed by solemnity. He had a playful side, and this side would emerge in his work as a copyist. The hours spent in the scriptorium, bent over the manuscript in near silence, gave Cuthbert a strange freedom. It was a freedom he would express in the most unexpected way. At first glance, Brother Cuthbert's manuscripts appear just like any other. The script is neat and precise, the ink dark and consistent. But as you turn the pages, you begin to notice something strange. In the margins, small, almost invisible at first, are little drawings, doodles that don't belong in a sacred text. A small bird perched on a branch, its beak open as if singing a song. A simple, smiley face drawn in the corner of a page, a quiet rebellion against the monotony. A scribbled note, barely legible, reading, "God is watching," but he probably also enjoys a good laugh. These marginalia are his way of passing the time, of sneaking moments of joy into the work that was otherwise filled with reverence and solemnity. But these weren't just simple doodles. Some were subtle jokes aimed at his fellow monks, and some were comments on the texts themselves. In one manuscript, there is a drawing of a monk with a large, exaggerated nose, a mockery of a brother who was known for his pride. In another, there's a small dragon, its fiery breath drawn around a line of text about the dangers of sin. At first, these were just light-hearted distractions, but as you look closer, you start to see something more. An expression of a human spirit that refused to be suppressed by the heavy weight of monastic life. Brother Cuthbert's marginalia was his way of asserting his individuality in a world that demanded conformity. Marginalia wasn't unique to Cuthbert, of course. It was a common feature in medieval manuscripts, though often overlooked. Monks, after all, spent hours in the scriptorium, copying manuscripts that were often repetitive and mentally taxing. And while some might have found solace in the quiet contemplation of scripture, others, like Cuthbert, found solace in the margins of the page. The marginalia became their way of speaking back to the texts they were copying, of injecting their own personality into the otherwise strict and unyielding work. In some cases, these doodles and notes weren't just harmless diversions. They were subtle forms of rebellion. Some monks used the margins to express their discontent with the authority of the church, or to critique the teachings they were transcribing. These notes weren't meant to be seen by the outside world. They were hidden messages, tucked away in the most unlikely places. Brother Cuthbert's work, while largely forgotten by the outside world, lived on within the abbey's walls. Over time, the monks who followed him came to appreciate his small acts of rebellion, his subtle expressions of individuality. And though his marginalia may have seemed frivolous to some, to others, they were a reminder of the humanity that still existed within the walls of the abbey. As you sit in your desk, copying your own manuscripts, you think of Brother Cuthbert. You wonder what he might have doodled if he had lived in your time. Perhaps he would have sketched a cartoon of the abbot, or written a note about the monotony of the work. Perhaps he would have left a secret joke in the margins of this very manuscript you are copying. But for now, all you can do is focus on the task at hand, your quill moving across the parchment, knowing that your work too will leave behind a legacy, whether it's one of humor or piety, of silence or rebellion. Of course, not every monk shared Brother Cuthbert's sense of humor. The abbot, for example, took a more serious view of the work. He was a man of deep devotion, dedicated to the preservation of the sacred texts. He spent his days in prayer, overseeing the monastery's affairs and ensuring that the work in the scriptorium continued without interruption. But the abbot was not blind to the presence of Brother Cuthbert's marginalia. He had noticed the strange drawings over the years, and while he had turned a blind eye to them at first, there were whispers among the other monks that the abbot was not pleased. Some even claimed that the abbot had scolded Cuthbert for his lack of reverence. Yet the abbot never removed the manuscripts from circulation. Perhaps deep down he understood the importance of these small acts of rebellion. Perhaps he too saw in the margins a glimpse of the monk's soul, struggling to make sense of a life that often felt monotonous and confined. As you continue to work in the scriptorium, your thoughts drift back to the mystery that has lingered for years, the case of the vanished manuscript. You've heard the stories, the whispers among the monks, the rumors about missing pages, hidden texts, and the secret codes concealed within the very fabric of the abbey's manuscripts. It's said that one night long ago, a manuscript was discovered missing from the abbey's library. It was no ordinary book. It was the Codex of the Saints, a rare and valuable text believed to hold ancient secrets about the origins of Christianity. The manuscript was last seen in the hands of Brother Elias, a monk known for his dedication to the sacred texts and his almost obsessive devotion to preserving knowledge. But the night it disappeared, so did he. The mystery has haunted the abbey ever since. Some say that Brother Elias stole it for himself, that he took the manuscript to an unknown location, hiding it away to protect its secrets. Others claim that it was stolen by an outsider, an enemy of the church who sought to destroy the knowledge contained within its pages. But no one truly knows what happened to it. As time passed, more manuscripts began to go missing. Pages, sometimes whole sections of books, would disappear from the abbey's shelves. No one ever found them. The monks searched high and low, but the pages remained elusive, slipping through their fingers like ghosts. There were those who believed that the missing pages held hidden messages, secret codes that only a select few could decipher. Some claimed that the missing texts contained forbidden knowledge, lost teachings of the early church that had been suppressed for centuries. These texts, they said, were so powerful that they could change the course of history. The monks, of course, dismissed such theories as fanciful rumors, but there was something unsettling about the disappearances, something that didn't just sit right in the pit of your stomach as you sit in your desk, quill in hand, copying the same words that have been written for centuries. The mystery only deepened when scholars began to notice strange symbols in the margins of some of the abbey's remaining manuscripts. These symbols, oddly shaped runes, numbers arranged in peculiar patterns, appeared in the most unlikely places. They seemed to have no logical explanation. Some believed they were codes, messages hidden in plain sight, meant to be deciphered by a select few. One such manuscript, the Codex of the Saints, still contained these strange markings, even though the majority of its pages had vanished. Scholars who came to the abbey to study it were baffled. The symbols seemed to form patterns, but no one could figure out their meaning. Some speculated that they were part of an ancient religious secret, a hidden knowledge that had been passed down through the centuries. Then, one fateful day, a new monk arrived at the abbey, a young scholar named Brother Edmund. He was bright, eager to prove himself and fascinated by the mystery of the missing manuscripts. He spent days poring over the texts, carefully examining the symbols and marginalia left by Brother Cuthbert and others. And then it happened. Brother Edmund made a breakthrough. The codes, the symbols, they were not random at all. They were a map that led to the hidden location of the missing manuscript. With a sense of urgency, Brother Edmund gathered a small group of trusted monks and set out on a secret mission to uncover the truth. They followed the map, venturing deep into the monastery's catacombs, where they discovered a hidden room, concealed for centuries. Inside they found the missing manuscript, its pages perfectly intact. But the manuscript held more than just religious knowledge. It contained secrets, hidden wisdom that had been lost to time. And in the end, it was clear that Brother Elias, like Brother Cuthbert, had left his mark on history, not just in the margins of a page, but in the very fabric of the abbey itself. As the days in the scriptorium drag on, with your fingers stiff from the endless copying of sacred texts, you can't help but wonder about those who don't have to endure this labor. The monks who toil away in the dim, cold rooms of the abbey seem to live in a world that is isolated from the wealth and luxury that the outside world has to offer. Yet there exists another world, a world far removed from the stone walls of the monastery, where books, those same precious manuscripts that you copy with such care, are not only treasured but also treated as rare, expensive luxuries. You have heard stories about the elite, the lords and ladies who live in palatial estates. These are the ones who own the manuscripts you copy by hand. The very texts you labor over for hours are often stored behind velvet curtains, locked away in climate-controlled rooms, guarded by servants and protectors. For them, books are not tools of faith or devotion, but symbols of status and power. The noble libraries are a world apart from the scriptorium you inhabit. While you and your fellow monks live in austerity, surrounded by rough-hewn furniture and cold stone walls, the aristocracy lives in opulence. Their libraries are more than just places of study. They are lavish rooms, adorned with gilded furniture, heavy velvet curtains, and rich tapestries that hang from the walls like works of art. The books themselves are stored in these rooms, carefully encased in wooden cabinets, often lined with velvet or satin. Each manuscript is treated with the utmost care, kept away from the wear and tear of everyday life. The manuscripts are not only valuable for their content, but for their rarity and the intricate craftsmanship that went into their creation. These are the same books that the monks painstakingly copy, yet they are kept under lock and key, shielded from the public eye. Unlike the monks, who handle the manuscripts with reverence, these elite libraries are often filled with luxury. The books are precious commodities, objects of desire, flaunted to guests, stored in air-conditioned rooms, or locked away in display cases like jewels. To the nobles, these books are a way to show their wealth, their connection to the sacred, and their dominance over knowledge itself. Behind the scenes of these magnificent libraries are the servants, often overlooked and underappreciated, yet vital to the maintenance of these book collections. The noble owners of these libraries do not spend their days carefully transcribing manuscripts or even reading the books they own. No, their servants handle the books for them, turning the pages with gloved hands, ensuring that each book is kept in pristine condition. The servants are the true guardians of these books. They dust the shelves, organize the manuscripts, and ensure that the tomes are not damaged by the elements. In some noble households, servants are even tasked with the responsibility of reading aloud from the books, particularly when guests are present. The nobles sip their wine, discuss matters of court and state, while the servants quietly turn the pages, reading passages of history or scripture, never truly engaging with the knowledge within the books they care for. For the servants, it is a life of silent devotion to a world that belongs to the elite. They are the caretakers of knowledge, but they are never allowed to possess it. The books may be in their hands, but the knowledge inside is not for them to access. They are, in a sense, the true keepers of secrets, hidden away in the velvet boxes of the elite. It's difficult not to feel resentment as you sit in the cold scriptorium, copying page after page of sacred texts, while the nobility flaunt their manuscripts like trophies. They keep these rare books in velvet-lined boxes, not out of reverence for the knowledge contained within, but for the status it confers upon them. The noble libraries are filled with books that have been carefully curated, often chosen for their rarity, their exquisite bindings, or the fame of the author. These manuscripts are not meant for the common folk. They are for display. They serve as symbols of the noble family's connection to the divine, to the past, to the great intellectual traditions of the world. To the elite, these books represent power. The ability to own a manuscript, to possess knowledge, is a statement of dominance. The lords and ladies who own these books are not interested in the content within. They are interested in the prestige that comes with possessing the sacred and the rare. Knowledge to them is a commodity, something to be shown off to guests, something to be kept locked away, protected from the common folk who will never have access to it. As a monk, you spend your days with ink-stained fingers, bent over parchment, dedicating yourself to the task of preserving knowledge for the future. Every letter you write, every word you transcribe, is done with the utmost care and devotion. The work is difficult, monotonous, and at times painful, but you do it because you believe in the importance of the task. The words you write are sacred. They are meant to preserve the knowledge of the past and to spread the word of God. But when you look at the noble libraries, when you hear the stories of how the elite treat their manuscripts, you wonder if the work you do will ever truly be appreciated. These books, which you labor over, are stored away in velvet boxes, only to be admired for their gilded covers and ornate bindings. The knowledge inside is rarely read, and when it is often viewed as little more than a symbol of wealth and power. The books you write are preserved for their content, but for the nobles, the books are preserved for their status. But change is coming. The invention of the printing press will soon disrupt this delicate balance of power. The laborious task of copying manuscripts by hand, which has taken centuries to perfect, is about to become obsolete. In the next few decades, the presses will begin to churn out books faster than any monk could ever hope to copy by hand. The monks, who have spent their entire lives laboring in silence, preserving the sacred texts for future generations, will find themselves displaced by the efficiency of the printing press. The books that were once treasures, carefully copied and stored away, will be mass-produced, flooding the markets and making knowledge more accessible than ever before. The elite will no longer be the sole custodians of knowledge, and the common folk will finally have access to the wisdom contained in the sacred books. For the monks, this is a bittersweet change. On one hand, the printing press will ease their burdens. No longer will they have to spend hours bent over parchment, copying line after line. But on the other hand, the press will render their work insignificant. The noble libraries, once filled with rare and precious books, will soon be filled with nothing more than mass-produced copies, no longer symbols of power, but common commodities. As you sit at your desk, copying the words of the saints, you can't help but wonder what the future holds. The work you do, the sacred task of preserving knowledge, will continue for now, but change is inevitable. The printing press is coming, and soon the world will be filled with books, books that are no longer rare, no longer kept in velvet boxes behind locked doors. You finish the day's work, your fingers sore, your eyes tired from hours of focus. The candle flickers in the corner, casting long shadows across the room. Tomorrow, you will return to the scriptorium, to the same work, the same rhythm, the same silence. But for now, as you close the manuscript, you wonder what the future will look like when the world of books is no longer reserved for the elite and the chosen few. For now, though, it is still your world, a world of ink-stained fingers, candle-lit scriptoriums, and the quiet, steady work of preserving the knowledge that has been passed down through the ages. And as you lay your head down to rest, the weight of centuries presses down on you, and you fall asleep knowing that, for all the luxury and power of the elite, it is your labor that keeps the flame of knowledge alive. As the days in the scriptorium pass by, your mind occasionally drifts to the mystery that has hung over the abbey like a thick, impenetrable fog, the mystery of the vanishing manuscript. The thefts that have occurred within the hallowed halls of this monastery remain unsolved to this day. Pages have gone missing, entire sections of books have disappeared without a trace, and strange symbols have appeared in places where they shouldn't be. The question that lingers in the air, like the faint smell of ink, is simple. What happened to the missing manuscripts? Over the years, whispers have spread among the monks. Whispers of stolen texts, missing pages, and secret codes hidden within the manuscripts. Some monks say it was the work of a rogue monk, a heretic who sought to destroy the knowledge contained within these sacred books. Others claim it was the work of an outsider, a thief who broke into the abbey under cover of darkness. But no one knows for sure. What is certain, however, is that the missing manuscripts hold secrets, secrets that no one has been able to unravel. The first disappearance occurred many years ago, long before you arrived at the abbey. It is a tale that still sends shivers down the spines of those who speak of it. The manuscript was known as the Codex of the Saints, an ancient text believed to contain the teachings of early Christian saints, written in a script that had long been lost to time. The Codex was one of the abbey's most prized possessions, a treasure that had been painstakingly preserved for centuries. One evening, as the abbey fell into the stillness of night, the manuscript was discovered missing from its place in the library. The guards were certain no one had entered the building. The doors were locked, the windows barred. The manuscript had simply vanished, as if it had never existed at all. The monks were in shock. How could such an important text just disappear? Some monks believed it was a sign, a divine message, that the manuscript was no longer meant to be read. Others, however, were not so quick to accept such explanations. The abbot at the time, Brother Gregory, launched a full investigation. He questioned every monk, examined every inch of the library, and even consulted the local authorities. But the manuscript was never found. The only clue was a single page left behind, a page that seemed to have been torn from the codex itself. The page contained a cryptic message written in an unfamiliar script that none of the monks could decipher. And with that, the mystery of the vanishing manuscript began. As the years passed, more manuscripts began to disappear. At first, it was just a page here and there, but eventually, entire books began to vanish. The monks searched everywhere, the library, the catacombs, the corridors, the hidden alcoves, but no trace of the missing pages or books was ever found. Each disappearance seemed more mysterious than the last, and each time a manuscript vanished, it left behind only more questions. The abbot at the time, Brother Alistair, became obsessed with solving the mystery. He believed that the thefts were not random. He believed that someone, whether within the monastery or without, was deliberately taking the texts, erasing them from history. He consulted the oldest manuscripts in the abbey, searching for clues, hoping to find some pattern in the disappearances. It was during this search that the first strange markings appeared in the margins of a newly discovered manuscript, markings that appeared to be codes, symbols, and cryptic messages. Some monks believed they were part of an ancient secret, hidden for centuries, waiting to be uncovered. Others thought they were the work of a rogue monk, a heretic who sought to expose the hidden truths of the church. Whatever the case, the markings only added to the mystery. The markings in the margins were unlike any the monks had ever seen. They were not simply doodles or decorations, as some had assumed. They were intricate, precise, and seemed to follow a pattern. Some symbols resembled ancient runes, others resembled numbers arranged in peculiar sequences. The most perplexing feature was that the symbols appeared in various manuscripts scattered across the abbey. They were found in the margins of religious texts, in the corners of sacred scrolls, and even in the folds of parchment. At first, the monks dismissed the markings as the work of an idle hand. But when they were discovered in multiple manuscripts, it became clear that there was more to these symbols than met the eye. The markings, some believed, were part of a code that, if deciphered, could unlock the secrets of the missing manuscripts. But no monk could decipher the code. The symbols seemed to be a mix of different languages, cultures, and eras. Some monks even believed the symbols were a message from God, hidden in plain sight for only the most dedicated to understand. As the mystery deepened, the abbot became more desperate. He even sought the help of scholars from nearby towns, hoping that someone would be able to crack the code and unlock the secret behind the missing manuscripts. But despite their best efforts, the code remained unbroken, and the missing manuscripts remained lost. As the years went on, rumors began to spread. Some monks whispered that the thefts were the work of a rogue monk, someone within the abbey who was stealing the manuscripts for personal gain. Others believed that the missing books were not stolen at all, but hidden away in a secret chamber, waiting to be rediscovered. One particular theory gained traction: the idea that the missing manuscripts were being taken by a group of monks who had turned their backs on the church. These monks, it was said, were in search of forbidden knowledge that the church had sought to suppress for centuries. The stolen manuscripts, they believed, contained the true teachings of Christ, teachings that had been erased from history by the early church fathers. This theory, though tantalizing, remained just that, a theory. No one could prove that a rogue monk had stolen the manuscripts, and no one could find the secret chamber where they were said to be hidden. And so the mystery persisted. The missing pages remained missing, the symbols in the margins remained undeciphered, and the secrets of the vanished manuscripts remained locked away, perhaps forever. It was only after years of investigation and countless hours spent poring over old texts that Brother Edmund, the young monk who had joined the abbey recently, made a breakthrough. He had spent weeks studying the cryptic symbols and piecing together fragments of old manuscripts. He discovered that the symbols were not just random. They were part of an intricate map, a map that led to a hidden room beneath the abbey. With this new discovery, a small group of monks led by Brother Edmund embarked on a daring expedition to find the secret chamber. They ventured deep into the catacombs beneath the abbey, navigating through narrow passages and winding corridors, until they came to a heavy wooden door hidden behind a thick veil of cobwebs. With trembling hands, Brother Edmund pushed open the door, and what they found inside took their breath away. The room was filled with the missing manuscripts. Every book, every page that had disappeared over the years, was neatly stacked in the center of the room. The manuscripts were well preserved, their pages still intact. But there was something else in the room, something that none of the monks had expected to find. On the floor, next to the books, was a pile of strange artifacts, ancient relics, amulets, and symbols of an unknown origin. They appeared to be part of a long-forgotten ritual, one that had been practiced in secret for centuries, and at the center of it all was a single book, unlike any the monks had ever seen before. It was bound in dark leather, its cover etched with mysterious symbols, and its pages filled with cryptic writings that none of the monks could understand. Brother Edmund and the others stood in awe, unsure of what to make of their discovery. The missing manuscripts had been found, but what they contained was far more than they could have ever imagined. The secrets that had been hidden away for centuries were now exposed, but with this revelation came new questions that would remain unanswered for years to come. As you sit at your desk, copying the next page of the Psalms, you can't help but think about the mystery that has surrounded this abbey for so long. The missing manuscripts, the strange symbols, the secret chamber beneath the catacombs. It all seems like something out of a legend. But for those who have spent their lives here, in the quiet scriptorium, it is all too real. The missing pages may have been found, But the story is far from over. The secrets of the vanished manuscripts may yet be revealed, and perhaps in time you too will uncover the mysteries that lie hidden in the margins of the Abbey's texts. The mystery of the vanishing manuscripts has been solved, but the question remains, what now? You, like Brother Edmund and countless monks before you, continue your work. The manuscripts may be found, but there are still many secrets left to discover. The world is filled with hidden knowledge, and it is up to those who labor in silence, like you, to keep that knowledge alive. And so, you return to your task, your quill moving across the parchment once more. The work is never truly finished, but perhaps that is the point. In the end, it is not just the manuscripts that are important. It is the journey, the search for knowledge, and the quiet labor that makes it all worthwhile. The scriptorium feels much quieter now as you sit in your familiar seat, quill in hand, preparing for another day of painstakingly copying sacred texts. The flickering candlelight casts long shadows on the stone walls, and the scent of ink and parchment fills the air, familiar and comforting. Yet a strange unease has begun to settle in your chest, a feeling you can't quite shake. You've heard the rumors, whispers that have been spreading throughout the Abbey. At first, you dismissed them as idle chatter, nothing more than the gossip of travelers passing through the monastery east gates. But as the days go by, the whispers become harder to ignore. There are reports of something new, something that will change everything. The printing press. The printing press, invented by a man named Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century, is unlike anything the world has ever seen. It is a device that can produce books faster than any monk could ever hope to copy by hand. The press uses movable type, letters and characters that can be arranged and rearranged to print pages, rather than carving each page individually by hand. With it, books can be reproduced in large quantities, quickly and efficiently. What once took months to produce can now be done in a matter of days. At first, the idea seems impossible. How could something so mechanical, so impersonal, ever replace the sacred work of copying manuscripts by hand? The act of copying was not just labor, it was a form of devotion, a means of connecting with the divine through the written word. The monks believed that by copying the texts, they were preserving not only the words, but the very spirit of the texts themselves. But as the printing press begins to spread across Europe, it becomes clear that the world is changing. The printing press offers a new way of producing books, one that is faster, more efficient, and, most importantly, accessible to the masses. It is a threat to the very way of life that monks like you have known for centuries. Soon, books that were once rare and expensive, objects that only the elite could afford, will be available to anyone with the means to purchase them. The power of the written word, once confined to the Abbey, will soon belong to the world. You, like many of your fellow monks, are unsure of how to feel about this new invention. There is a sense of fear that lingers in the air, a fear that your sacred labor will soon be obsolete. What will happen to the scriptorium when the press takes over? What will happen to the delicate balance of faith, labor, and devotion that has defined the monastic life for centuries? The abbot, Brother Thomas, is no different. He has heard the rumors, and the fear is evident in his eyes. He calls for an emergency meeting of the Abbey's leadership, and you, along with the other monks, gather in the great hall to discuss the news. The air is thick with tension as the abbot addresses the assembly. "Brothers," he begins, his voice steady but tinged with concern, "we are on the brink of a great change. The printing press has been invented, and it is spreading across the land. It will no longer be necessary for us to copy the sacred texts by hand. The press will do the work for us, and we will be left with nothing but our memories." There is a silence in the room. The monks exchange glances, unsure of what to say. Some look fearful, others look skeptical. The idea of printing books seems foreign, unnatural, even dangerous. How could something so mechanical, so removed from the divine process of copying, ever compare to the sacred labor of a monk? "We must resist this," one of the older monks, Brother Alaric, says, his voice shaking. "It is an affront to the work we do here. It is sacrilege. How can we allow such a thing to replace the labor of our hands?" But the abbot, after a long pause, simply sighs and shakes his head. "Resistance is futile," he says. "The press is already here. It will change everything whether we like it or not. Our task now is to adapt to this new world." As the weeks pass, the presence of the printing press becomes impossible to ignore. The press is no longer just a rumor, it's a reality. It's being used to produce books in ever greater numbers. And soon it is clear that the world of book production is undergoing a revolution. You watch, both amazed and horrified, as the first printed copies of sacred texts arrive at the Abbey. They are identical to the ones you have been copying for years, every word, every letter, perfect in its reproduction. But there's something different about them. They lack the soul of the handwritten manuscript. The imperfections, the small mistakes, the slight variations in the lettering that made each manuscript unique, those are gone. The press has created something flawless, something that is efficient but devoid of the human touch. At first, the printed books are met with resistance. The monks argue that the press cannot replicate the spiritual connection that comes from copying texts by hand. They believe that the act of writing is sacred, that it is a form of prayer. The printed books, they argue, are cold and mechanical, mere reproductions of the original texts without the divine energy that comes from the labor of the monk. But despite the resistance, the press continues to spread. More and more printed books are produced, and they begin to flood the markets. The elite, who once guarded their hand-copied manuscripts as treasures, now find themselves with a new dilemma. The printed books are cheaper, faster to produce, and just as good, if not better, than the ones copied by hand. The printed books, once a luxury for the wealthy, become available to a broader audience. The nobles, who once kept their rare manuscripts locked away in velvet-lined boxes, now find themselves faced with a new reality. The printed books are not only more affordable, but they are also more accessible. The knowledge that was once reserved for the elite is now within reach of the common people. As the printed books flood the market, the elite begin to lose their hold on knowledge. The printed book is no longer a symbol of power. It is a commodity available to anyone who can afford it. For the monks, this is a bittersweet change. On one hand, the press frees them from the endless labor of copying texts. They no longer need to spend months hunched over manuscripts, painstakingly transcribing every word. But on the other hand, the press diminishes the value of their work, reducing it to a mere mechanical process, devoid of the soul that once infused the pages of their handwritten manuscripts. As you sit at your desk, watching the first printed books arrive at the Abbey, you feel a sense of unease. The world is changing, and you are unsure where you fit into this new world. The press has changed everything: the way books are produced, the way knowledge is disseminated, and even the way people view books. What was once a sacred labor, a spiritual act of devotion, is now just another piece of machinery. The question that lingers in your mind is simple. What does the future hold for monks like you? As the days go by, you find yourself wondering if the work you do in the scriptorium is now irrelevant. The printed books are faster, cheaper, and easier to produce. They are being mass-produced in quantities that would have been unimaginable just a few years ago. The monks who once copied manuscripts by hand now find themselves displaced by the printing press, which churns out book after book, with no need for the laborious work that once defined their lives. The printing press is not just a technological innovation, it is a symbol of a new age. An age where knowledge is no longer confined to the hands of a few, but is available to all. The age of the printed book is the dawn of a new intellectual revolution, one that will change the world in ways the monks of the scriptorium could never have imagined. And so, as you continue your work, copying the same texts over and over again, you wonder if this is the last chapter in the story of the monk copyist. The printing press has arrived, and it has brought with it the end of an era. But even as the press threatens to replace the labor of the monk, there remains one thing that no machine can replicate: the soul, the spirit, and the devotion that once went into each handwritten manuscript. Perhaps, in some way, that is what will endure. The world will change, but the work you do will always have meaning, even if it is no longer needed in the same way. As you lay your quill down for the final time, you reflect on the world you've spent your life in. The world of cold stone walls, flickering candlelight, and endless hours spent copying sacred texts. You think of Brother Cuthbert and the small jokes he left in the margins, of the monks who came before you, and of the endless labor that was once seen as a sacred duty. The world is changing. The printing press is reshaping everything. And yet, even as you watch the old ways disappear, you can help but feel that there is something timeless about the work you do, something that no machine can replace. For now, the press may reign supreme, but there will always be room for the handwritten word. And that, in the end, is the legacy you leave behind. The quiet, steady labor of a monk copyist whose work, even in the face of revolution, will never truly be forgotten. As you sit in the scriptorium, quill in hand, the weight of history presses down on you. You're not just copying words onto parchment. No, this task is far greater than that. The labor you engage in, though silent and uncelebrated, is something that will echo through the centuries. It is in these very pages that knowledge will endure, that the great ideas of the past will be preserved for future generations. Though your work seems mundane now, it will live on, long after the ink dries and the candlelight fades. The monks who came before you, those whose hands have held the quill, those who've belabored in these quiet rooms, may have never fully realized the scale of their contribution to the future. Yet, it is undeniable. The legacy of the monk copyist is written in every manuscript, in every page, that survives the ravages of time. And as the printing press begins to take hold, you can't help but wonder what the future holds for the written word. But one thing is clear: the impact of your work and that of your brethren will never truly fade. The task of the monk copyist was simple yet profound. On the surface, it seemed like nothing more than an act of labor. It was, after all, just writing down the same words that had already been written. But there was more to it than that. Each letter, each word, was a commitment to the preservation of knowledge, a determination to ensure that the wisdom of the past was passed down to future generations. In a time when books were rare and costly, when knowledge was confined to the walls of the monastery, the monks were the unsung heroes of the intellectual world. They labored day in and day out to reproduce the texts that had been handed down from previous centuries, and it wasn't just religious texts that they copied. The monks of the Middle Ages were responsible for preserving works of philosophy, science, history, and law, texts that would have been lost to time had it not been for their dedication. When the fall of the Roman Empire ushered in a period of political instability and cultural decline in Europe, it was the monasteries that became the centers of learning. The monks, far from being isolated from the world, were the keepers of ancient wisdom. They took the works of the ancient Greeks and Romans, often in fragments, and copied them with painstaking care. What we know today about classical antiquity, about Aristotle, Plato, and the works of Virgil and Ovid, exists because of the labor of the monks who transcribed these texts by hand. But the role of the monk copyist didn't stop with classical texts. The monks also transcribed religious works, including the Bible and the writings of church fathers, ensuring that the teachings of Christianity would be preserved for future generations. In a time before printing presses, when books were scarce and expensive, the monks were the ones who carried the weight of knowledge on their shoulders. As you sit at your desk, transcribing page after page, it's hard to imagine that your work will one day spark the intellectual revolution known as the Renaissance. Yet it is true. The very labor you and your fellow monks engage in today will lay the groundwork for a future that is brimming with new ideas, discoveries, and creations. The Renaissance, the rebirth of art, science, and culture in Europe, owes much of its intellectual awakening to the work of the monk copyists. In the 14th and 15th centuries, as the Renaissance began to take shape, scholars and thinkers rediscovered the classical texts that had been preserved by monks in monasteries across Europe. It was through these texts that they were able to rekindle the flames of ancient knowledge and spark the intellectual revival that would give rise to new ideas in science, art, and philosophy. Without the monks' work, these texts might have been lost to time, and the Renaissance might never have happened. Men like Petrarch and Erasmus, who were instrumental in the development of humanism during the Renaissance, were able to access the works of the ancients because of the monks who had copied these texts centuries before. The work of the monks in preserving the classical works of antiquity was the spark that ignited the intellectual fires of the Renaissance. It was through their labor that the ideas of Plato, Aristotle, Cicero, and others were resurrected, and through these ideas, the foundations of modern science and philosophy were laid. The work of the monk copyist didn't just influence scholars and intellectuals, it also had a profound impact on the rise of literacy in Europe. Though books were rare and expensive during the medieval period, the work of the monks played a crucial role in making literature and knowledge available to a wider audience. It was not just the elite who were able to access books. As the centuries progressed, the monasteries began to produce more and more manuscripts, increasing the availability of books and allowing more people to learn to read and write. The monks were the ones who made books available to those who sought them. They made it possible for people, particularly those living in the monasteries, to engage with the written word. By the time the printing press arrived, literacy was beginning to spread. The work of the monk copyists had laid the foundation for the wider dissemination of knowledge. Their labor had made the written word an integral part of daily life. Without their work, literacy might have remained confined to the upper classes for much longer, if not forever. As the printing press slowly begins to replace the monk copyist, it's easy to think that their labor was in vain. After all, the press can produce books in a fraction of the time it takes a monk to copy them by hand. The world is changing, and the work of the monks is becoming obsolete. But their legacy is not so easily erased. The work of the monk copyist has an enduring legacy, one that will persist long after the last manuscript is printed. The monks were not just scribes, they were the guardians of knowledge. Through their work, they ensured that the wisdom of the ancients, the teachings of the Church, and the intellectual heritage of Europe were preserved for future generations. Their labor was not just a means to an end, it was a sacred act, a devotion to the written word and to the preservation of knowledge itself. Even as the printing press makes the work of the monk copyists seem obsolete, the importance of their labor is undeniable. The very idea of preserving knowledge, of ensuring that the written word endures across generations, is something that continues to shape our world today. It is a legacy that the printing press cannot erase. The monk copyist's labor, though no longer needed in the same way, still informs our relationship with books, knowledge, and the written word. As you sit at your desk, quill in hand, it's hard to imagine that your work will be remembered in the same way that the work of the monks who came before you has been remembered. but in a way it's true. The legacy of the monk copyist lives on today in the digital age. While the work of copying manuscripts by hand may no longer be necessary, the act of preserving knowledge, the drive to ensure that information is not lost, continues to be a driving force in our world. Today, in our digital age, we have modern-day copyists, those who preserve and transmit knowledge through digital media. Just as the monks carefully transcribed texts by hand, we now preserve and share knowledge through digital formats. From e-books to online databases, from blogs to podcasts. The work of the monk copyist, though transformed by technology, still lives on in the work of librarians, archivists, scholars, and digital curators. Just as the monks once ensured that knowledge would survive for future generations, we now work to ensure that digital knowledge will endure in the centuries to come. In this way, the legacy of the monk copyist is not just a thing of the past. It is a living, breathing force that continues to shape the way we interact with information, the written word, and the preservation of knowledge. As you lay down your quill, the candlelight flickering in the corner, you realize that the work you do in the scriptorium is more than just a task. It is part of a long tradition, a tradition that spans centuries, that has shaped the course of history. The monk copyists may no longer be needed to transcribe manuscripts by hand, but their legacy, this sacred labor, this commitment to preserving knowledge, will endure long after the ink has dried. In the end, the legacy of the monk copyist is not just written in the pages they've transcribed, but in the very fabric of our culture. It is in the books we read, the knowledge we share, and the way we continue to pass information from one generation to the next. The monks of the past may have lived in a world far removed from our own, but their work has shaped the world we live in today, and in that way their labor is immortal. The work of the monk copyist, though long relegated to history, had a profound influence on the course of human civilization. As you sit in the scriptorium, the flickering candle casting soft shadows across the stone walls, the work of your hands seems insignificant, yet the events unfolding outside these walls are anything but. The printing press, this new invention, begins to ripple outwards, reaching into the far corners of Europe, reshaping not only the way books are made, but also how ideas are spread, how knowledge is consumed, and how people relate to power, religion, and the world around them. This is a time of transformation, of revolutions in thought, culture, and society. What once took months of painstaking labor to produce is now available in a matter of days. The printed page, with its uniformity and efficiency, is rapidly replacing the hand-copied manuscript, but in its wake, it brings something even more powerful: the spread of knowledge to the masses. The world is changing in ways that no one could have anticipated. As the 15th century dawns and the printing press spreads across Europe, a new intellectual movement begins to take hold. It is a movement that harkens back to the glory of classical antiquity, a revival of the arts, literature, and philosophy of the ancient Greeks and Romans. This movement, known as the Renaissance, is a cultural rebirth, and it would never have been possible without the work of the monks who preserved the ancient texts. With the printing press, the works of Aristotle, Plato, Cicero, and other ancient thinkers are no longer confined to the shelves of wealthy libraries or the hands of a few privileged scholars. They are now available to a wider audience, and this opens up a world of intellectual possibility. The press brings these works to the forefront of European thought, sparking a revolution in philosophy, art, and science. The Renaissance thinkers, the humanists, look back to the classical world for inspiration, but they also seek to forge a new path. They question the established order, they challenge long-held assumptions, and they explore the potential of human reason and creativity. The work of the monk copyists, who painstakingly transcribed these ancient texts, becomes the foundation upon which the Renaissance is built. Figures like Petrarch, Erasmus and Thomas More begin to delve into the classical works that were preserved by the monks. These works, once only available to a few scholars, now shape the intellectual landscape of Europe. The printing press becomes the vehicle for the rapid dissemination of these ideas, and it's clear that the course of history is shifting. The Renaissance is born not from the hands of the monks themselves, but from their labor of preservation. But the printing press's impact isn't confined to the world of philosophy and art. Its reach extends to religion as well. In the early 16th century, a monk by the name of Martin Luther begins to challenge the authority of the Roman Catholic Church, and the printing press plays a pivotal role in the Reformation. Luther's 95 Theses, which he famously nails to the church door in Wittenberg, are more than just a religious protest. They are a call for reform, for a return to the original teachings of the Bible, and it's the printing press that allows Luther's ideas to spread across Europe in a matter of weeks. His theses, printed and distributed widely, spark a religious revolution, one that will fracture the Catholic Church and give rise to Protestantism. For the first time in history, the printed word becomes a tool for mass communication. Luther's pamphlets, translated into German, English, and other languages, are read by ordinary people, many of whom cannot read Latin, the language of the Church. The printing press democratizes knowledge in a way that the monks could never have imagined. Luther's challenge to the Pope's authority is amplified by the power of the press, and soon his message spreads like wildfire. The Reformation is a turning point in European history, and it is only possible because of the printing press. Without the ability to print and distribute Luther's writings, the Reformation would have remained a local event, confined to Wittenberg. But thanks to the press, Luther's ideas become a powerful force for change. The very fabric of religion in Europe is torn asunder, and the world will never be the same again. The printing press also has a profound impact on the realm of science. In the centuries that follow the Renaissance and Reformation, Europe enters a period of intense scientific discovery, the scientific revolution. Figures like Galileo, Copernicus, and Newton begin to challenge long-held views of the universe, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge and understanding. The works of these scientists are quickly disseminated across Europe thanks to the printing press. Copernicus's revolutionary ideas about the heliocentric model of the solar system, which placed the sun at the center of the universe, are printed and spread, despite the opposition of the Catholic Church. Galileo's observations with the telescope are published, and his findings spark a new way of thinking about the cosmos. Newton's Principia Mathematica lays the foundations for modern physics, and it is distributed to scholars all over Europe. The press allows these groundbreaking works to be shared quickly, and the exchange of ideas that it fosters leads to a scientific revolution. No longer are these discoveries confined to the minds of a few scholars or isolated monasteries. The printing press ensures that the knowledge of the world can be shared, debated, and built upon. The scientific revolution, much like the Renaissance, owes its existence to the work of the monk copyists, who, through their labor, preserved the classical texts that inspired the great minds of the Enlightenment. But the impact of the printing press is not limited to scholars and intellectuals. One of its most profound effects is the rise of literacy across Europe. As printed books become more affordable and accessible, more people learn to read. The spread of knowledge is no longer confined to the elite. Ordinary men and women, peasants, merchants, artisans, begin to read and engage with the texts that were once reserved for the church and nobility. Literacy becomes a means of empowerment. People begin to read not only religious texts, but also works on science, philosophy, and law. This creates a more informed, engaged citizenry, capable of questioning authority and engaging with the world around them. The printing press helps to create a public sphere, an intellectual and cultural marketplace where ideas can be exchanged freely and openly. This rise in literacy also contributes to the development of new social movements, political theories, and revolutionary ideas. The Enlightenment, with its emphasis on reason and individual rights, is shaped by the ability of people to read and think critically about the world. The press, which began as a tool for printing books, becomes the backbone of the modern world of ideas, a world where information is not just controlled by a few, but shared by the many. As you sit back and reflect on the world around you, it's hard to escape the weight of the legacy you've inherited. The work of the monk copyist, though seemingly humble, has had a profound impact on the course of human history. The labor you've engaged in, though now seemingly irrelevant in the face of the printing press, is the reason that knowledge has survived through the ages. It is the foundation upon which the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution were built. And though the monk copyist's role has been supplanted by the machine, the mission remains the same: to preserve knowledge, to pass it on to future generations, and to ensure that the ideas of the past continue to shape the present and the future. In this new world of printed books and digital knowledge, the legacy of the monk copyist is not lost. It lives on in the pages of the books we read, in the digital texts we access, and in the very act of preserving the knowledge that defines us. What began in the quiet scriptorium, with ink-stained fingers and candlelight, has evolved into the world of knowledge we live in today, a world of information, communication, and education. As you lay your quill down for the final time, the scriptorium fading into the dim light of evening, you realize that your labor has not been in vain. Though the world may have changed, though the printing press may have rendered your work obsolete, the essence of your mission, the preservation and transmission of knowledge, has not. The work of the monk copyist, like the knowledge it preserves, endures. In the end, it is not the medium that matters. It is the message, the words, the ideas, the stories that continue to pass through time. And you, through your work, have ensured that those words will never be forgotten. The legacy of the monk copyist, though quiet and humble, lives on in every book, every scroll, every digital text, and it will endure long after the ink has dried and the candle has burned out. As the printing press spreads across Europe, its influence expands far beyond the walls of the monasteries and the libraries of the elite. It begins to touch every aspect of society, transforming not just how books are produced, but how knowledge is disseminated, how governments rule, and how people view their own power in relation to the world around them. The press, once a tool for religious reformers and intellectuals, is now a force that changes institutions in ways that no one could have predicted. The very fabric of society, education, politics, and religion, begins to unravel and reshape itself under the weight of the printed word. And with each passing year, the press drives humanity into a new age of information, power, and revolution. One of the most immediate effects of the printing press is its transformation of political power. Before the press, the dissemination of information was a slow, limited process. Rulers controlled knowledge by restricting access to it. Only the wealthy and the clergy had access to books, and knowledge was a tightly held commodity. But with the printing press, a new form of mass communication is born. Pamphlets, books, and newspapers begin to spread rapidly. Political ideas that once could only be whispered in private or discussed among small circles are now printed and distributed to the masses. This creates a world where ideas, revolutionary, radical, and progressive ideas, can take root outside the grasp of the elite. The printing press becomes a tool for political leaders and revolutionaries. It helps spread Luther's Reformation, the French Revolution, and the American Revolution. In fact, the very concept of democracy as we understand it today is influenced by the ability to spread political discourse to the common people. The press gives a voice to the masses, allowing them to challenge authority and form their own opinions. Without the printing press, the political revolutions of the modern world may never have happened in the way they did. For example, the French Revolution was deeply connected to the dissemination of new political ideas, many of which were fueled by printed materials. Pamphlets criticizing the monarchy, arguing for the rights of citizens, and promoting new democratic ideals flooded the streets of Paris. The power of the printed word made it possible for revolutionaries to rally the people to action. The same was true for the American Revolution, where pamphlets like Thomas Paine's Common Sense helped unite the colonies against British rule. Of course, one of the most significant impacts of the printing press was its effect on religion. In the 16th century, Martin Luther and other reformers used the press to spread their critique of the Catholic Church. The printing press enabled Luther to distribute his 95 Theses far and wide, challenging the very foundations of the Catholic faith. Before the press, religious doctrine was controlled by the Church, and the Bible itself was a rare and expensive book. The Catholic Church held the monopoly on religious knowledge, interpreting the scriptures for the masses. But when the press made it possible to produce the Bible in vernacular languages so that people could read it for themselves, everything changed. Luther's translation of the Bible into German, printed and distributed across Europe, allowed ordinary people to read the Word of God in their own language. This was a direct challenge to the Church's authority. The printing press made it possible for the Protestant Reformation to spread rapidly, undermining the Catholic Church's monopoly on religious thought and practice. Furthermore, the press made it easier for theologians, philosophers, and religious scholars to share their ideas. Instead of relying on handwritten manuscripts that had to be copied by hand and often took years to complete, ideas could now be printed, distributed, and read almost instantaneously. This allowed for the rapid spread of new theological ideas, leading to the establishment of new Protestant denominations, religious debates, and divisions that shaped the course of history. Another profound effect of the printing press was its role in expanding literacy and education. In the medieval period, literacy was limited to the clergy and the elite. Few people were able to read, and even fewer could afford to own books. But as the press made books cheaper and more widely available, the opportunity to learn expanded. The printing press democratized knowledge, making it accessible to anyone who could read. Schools and universities were established with the goal of making education available to a wider audience. New printed textbooks allowed for the spread of scientific knowledge, historical accounts, and literary works across Europe. Children, no longer limited to oral traditions and expensive manuscripts, began to be educated from printed materials. The spread of printed books meant that knowledge could be transmitted to more people, from the farthest reaches of the countryside to the largest cities. Ordinary men and women were no longer confined to the ignorance of the past. They could read works on philosophy, science, politics, and history. They could learn about the natural world and about the lives and ideas of those who came before them. The spread of literacy had long-lasting effects. As more people became literate, it created a more informed and engaged populace. The Enlightenment would not have been possible without this rise in literacy. Philosophers like Voltaire, John Locke, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau were able to reach wider audiences, influencing ideas on human rights, government, and society that would eventually lead to the development of modern democracy. The printing press also revolutionized the way scientific knowledge was shared. In the centuries following the press's invention, the world saw the rise of the scientific revolution. Great thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and Newton were able to share their groundbreaking discoveries with the world in a way that would have been unimaginable in the past. Before the printing press, scientific knowledge was confined to the hands of a few scholars. Manuscripts had to be painstakingly copied by hand, and only a handful of copies of scientific works existed. But with the advent of the printing press, scholars could quickly disseminate their findings, allowing for the rapid exchange of ideas and discoveries. For the first time in history, the scientific community was able to communicate and build upon each other's work in real time. The printed books that described the heliocentric model of the universe, the laws of motion, and the theory of gravity spread across Europe, changing the way people understood the world. Galileo's dialogue concerning the two chief world systems challenged the geocentric model of the universe, and Newton's Principia Mathematica laid the foundations for modern physics. These works, printed and widely distributed, transformed the intellectual landscape, sparking a new era of discovery and thought. The printing press not only made scientific knowledge available to scholars, but also to the general public. It allowed people to access the findings of the great scientists of the time and to learn more about the world around them. The press became a tool for the intellectual and cultural transformation that defined the age of enlightenment. The most profound consequence of the printing press, perhaps, is the creation of a public sphere, a space where ideas, arguments, and debates could take place openly and freely. The printed word gave birth to public discourse, enabling citizens to engage with ideas that had previously been inaccessible to them. Newspapers, pamphlets, and books became tools of public engagement. The printing press allowed people to discuss politics, science, religion, and social issues in ways that had never been possible before. This shift in the flow of information paved the way for modern democratic societies, where public opinion could influence the course of events. Before the press, information was controlled by a small group of elites, monarchs, popes, and aristocrats. But with the spread of printed material, the people were able to participate in the political process in a more direct way. Newspapers like the London Gazette became outlets for news, opinion, and political debate, while pamphlets and books spread revolutionary ideas. In a sense, the printing press helped to create modern public institutions, such as parliaments, universities, and media outlets, all of which rely on the rapid dissemination of information to function effectively. The press gave people the tools they needed to become informed citizens, enabling them to participate in the civic life of their nations. As you sit back in your desk, quill in hand, you realize that the invention of the printing press was not just a technical achievement, it was a cultural revolution. It didn't just change how books were made, it changed how ideas were shared, how power was distributed, and how society was structured. The press transformed the way we learn, the way we communicate, and the way we engage with the world. Though the press has evolved into digital media, the core effect remains the same: the democratization of knowledge. The printing press opened the door for a more informed public, for the spread of scientific discoveries, for political revolutions, and for the intellectual freedom that shapes our modern world. In the end, the printing press is not just a machine, it is a symbol of progress, of human ingenuity, and of the unbreakable chain of knowledge that stretches from the monks of the past to the digital age of today. As the days in the scriptorium blend into one another with ink-stained hands and the flicker of candlelight, you find yourself reflecting on the world beyond these stone walls. The monastery, once the center of learning, now feels like a relic of the past. Outside, the world is changing at a rapid pace. The medieval period, with its rigid social structures and religious authority, is giving way to something new, something unknown. This is a time of transformation, a time when the very fabric of society is being rewoven. The Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution are not just intellectual movements, they are cultural revolutions that will reshape every aspect of human life. These changes will transcend the walls of the monastery and reach into the hearts and minds of people across Europe. It is the dawn of the modern age. In the medieval period, society was structured like a pyramid. At the top sat the king or monarch, followed by nobles, knights and peasants. This rigid system, known as feudalism, governed every aspect of life. Lords held land and controlled resources, while peasants, bound by serfdom, worked the land in exchange for protection and sustenance. But as the 14th and 15th centuries unfold, cracks begin to appear in this system. The Black Death, 1347-1351, devastates Europe, killing between 25 to 50% of the population. With fewer people working the land, labor becomes more valuable. The surviving peasants demand higher wages, and slowly but surely, the feudal system starts to crumble. In addition to the plague, the rise of trade and the middle class creates a more fluid economic system. Merchants, bankers, and artisans begin to gain wealth and influence, challenging the traditional power structures of the nobility. By the time of the Renaissance, the idea of a static, hierarchical society is being replaced by one that is more dynamic, where social mobility is possible and new ideas and innovations begin to flourish. The printing press, with its ability to disseminate knowledge quickly and cheaply, accelerates this process. The press spreads ideas about personal freedom, individual rights, and the power of knowledge, further weakening the authority of feudal lords and religious leaders. One of the most profound cultural shifts that emerges during this time is the rise of individualism. In medieval society, the focus was on the community, on collective identity and shared religious experience. People defined themselves by their roles in society as peasants, knights, or monks. Their lives were largely shaped by social structures and religious dogma, and their individual needs and desires were often subordinated to the needs of the group. But as Europe moves into the Renaissance and beyond, the idea of the individual begins to take center stage. Intellectuals and artists like Petrarch, Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Erasmus begin to celebrate the potential of the individual. No longer is the focus solely on the divine or on communal life. Now, humans are viewed as capable of achieving greatness on their own merit through talent, reason, and willpower. The idea of the self-made man begins to take hold. Artists, scientists, and philosophers now see themselves as independent creators of knowledge and beauty, rather than mere conduits for divine inspiration. This cultural shift is radical. For the first time, humans are seen as autonomous beings with the capacity to shape their own destinies. The Renaissance mantra of ad fontes, back to the sources, reflects this shift. Thinkers began to return to the classical texts of ancient Greece and Rome, celebrating the achievements of human reason and putting emphasis on the human experience. Humanism, with its focus on individual potential, becomes the intellectual movement that defines this era. The humanists who spearhead the Renaissance look back to the classical world for inspiration. They believed that the ancient Greeks and Romans had a wisdom that could guide society forward. But while they respect the classical past, humanists also emphasize the power of human experience and intellect to create a better future. Humanism leads to the development of secularism, the idea that human affairs should be separate from religious authority. This movement shifts focus from theological knowledge to secular education, emphasizing history, rhetoric, literature, arts, and philosophy as the foundations of a well-rounded education. For the first time in centuries, a non-religious education system begins to emerge, setting the stage for modern universities and the spread of intellectual ideas across Europe. Humanists like Erasmus and Thomas More argue for the value of studying classical texts and critical thinking, independent of religious doctrine. They advocate for an education system that nurtures individual judgment and creativity, not one that simply enforces religious orthodoxy. The rise of individualism and humanism paves the way for another monumental shift: the Reformation. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, posted in 1517, ignites a theological and political revolution that challenges the authority of the Catholic Church and calls for the reform of religious practices. The Reformation, fueled by the new printing press, spreads rapidly across Europe, challenging the Catholic Church's monopoly on religious knowledge. Luther's translation of the Bible into German makes the sacred text accessible to ordinary people, allowing them to interpret the scriptures for themselves, free from the Church's mediation. The Catholic Church can no longer claim sole authority over religious truth. The printing press enables ideas like Luther's doctrine of salvation by faith alone to spread quickly, sparking the Protestant Reformation. As the Reformation spreads, it splinters the unity of Christianity in Europe, giving rise to new Protestant denominations that reject the authority of the Pope. This religious fragmentation becomes a permanent feature of European society, and it significantly alters the political and cultural landscape, leading to centuries of religious conflict and change. The intellectual freedom fostered by the Renaissance and the Reformation leads directly to the scientific revolution. Thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, and Newton challenged long-held views of the universe, building on classical ideas but rejecting outdated theories that had been handed down for centuries. The printing press is instrumental in the spread of these new scientific ideas. Works like Galileo's Dialogue, concerning the two chief world systems, and Newton's Principia Mathematica, are printed and distributed, reaching a wide audience. The press makes it possible for scientific ideas to be shared across Europe, leading to new discoveries in astronomy, physics, biology, and mathematics. This revolution in thought challenges not just religious views, but also long-standing societal beliefs. As scientists and philosophers begin to push the boundaries of knowledge, they emphasize empirical observation, reason, and experimentation, the very foundations of modern science. As the intellectual and cultural revolutions of the Renaissance, Reformation, and scientific revolution reshape European society, political structures begin to change as well. The decline of feudalism, the rise of merchants and the middle class, and the influence of the printing press all contribute to the emergence of the nation-state. In the Middle Ages, political power was decentralized, with kings, lords, and nobles each holding sway over specific territories. But as the printing press accelerates the spread of ideas, a sense of national identity begins to take hold. The Reformation further weakens the power of the Church, and the monarchs begin to consolidate their power, creating more centralized political entities. The rise of modern nations leads to the creation of modern political systems. The printing press plays a key role in this process by spreading political ideas, from the writings of political philosophers like John Locke to revolutionary ideas like democracy and human rights. The press also helps to establish public opinion, a force that would become central to the development of modern democracies. As you sit at your desk, quill in hand, the scriptorium seems quieter than ever. You realize that the work you and the monks have done has not just preserved knowledge, it has laid the foundation for everything that follows. The intellectual, cultural, and political changes that began in the Renaissance, fueled by the work of the monk copyists and the invention of the printing press, have given rise to the world we live in today. The world outside the abbey walls may be changing, but the work of preserving knowledge, the drive to understand the world and to share that understanding, continues to shape human society. The modern world, with its ideas of individualism, democracy, science, and the free exchange of ideas has its roots in the work of the monks and the transformative power of the printing press. As the world continues to evolve, you reflect on how far society has come. The work of the past, your work, has had a profound impact, and though the methods have changed, the mission remains the same: to preserve knowledge, to share ideas, and to continue the work of building a better future for all. As the days in the scriptorium slowly draw to a close, you find yourself reflecting on the many years that have passed. Years of transcribing sacred texts, hours spent bent over parchment quill in hand, while candlelight flickered softly around you. The world outside these cold stone walls has changed, and with it, your place in the grand tapestry of history. The printing press has irrevocably altered everything, from how books are made to how knowledge is shared, and how power flows through society. You have spent your life in service to something larger than yourself. Your work, though seemingly quiet and anonymous, has played a pivotal role in the preservation of knowledge. You were one of the last to labor in this ancient tradition, a tradition that has endured for centuries. But now, as the printed word takes center stage, it's clear that your time in the scriptorium is nearing its end. The work of the monk copyist, though coming to a close, is far from forgotten. It has become the foundation upon which the modern world is built. The intellectual revolutions of the Renaissance, Reformation, and scientific revolution would never have been possible without the painstaking labor of the monks who preserved the knowledge of the ancients, who transcribed the sacred texts, and who quietly passed on the torch of human understanding to the next generation. You stand in the scriptorium one final time, the faint scent of ink and parchment lingering in the air. The room is quiet, too quiet. The candles flicker one last time, casting long shadows against the walls. The ancient manuscript you've been working on for weeks sits before you, its pages nearly complete. You run your fingers over the parchment, feeling the texture, remembering the many hours you spent with each letter, each word. In this moment, you realize how much has changed, not just in the world, but in yourself. Your work, your labor, was once seen as sacred, as a divine act. Now, with the printing press's rise, that sacred labor has been replaced by machines, by mass production and efficiency. And yet, despite the technological advancements and the world-changing forces that have been set in motion, you find a quiet peace. Your work has mattered. It may have been replaced, but it has laid the foundation for something even greater: the spread of knowledge, the rise of literacy, the democratization of ideas. The monk copyist's humble task has, in its own way, helped build the modern world. The printing press, with its mechanical efficiency, has allowed the world to flourish in ways that were once unimaginable. Knowledge is now in the hands of the many, not just the few. The sacred texts you once copied by hand are now available to all, not just the elite or the clergy. Political ideas, revolutionary thoughts, and scientific discoveries are spread far and wide, shaping the course of history. The world is changing faster than ever. From the birth of democracy to the exploration of space, the legacy of the monk copyist is woven into every part of modern society. It is a legacy that transcends time, that moves from ink-stained fingers to the digital age. The work that once took months now takes seconds, but the spirit behind it, the devotion to preserving knowledge, to spreading ideas, remains. The monk copyist's role in history may seem like a small part of a much larger story, but it is a crucial one. It is the story of humanity's quest for knowledge, its unyielding desire to understand itself and the world around it. From the dim light of the scriptorium to the bright glow of digital screens, the pursuit of knowledge has always been at the heart of human progress. As the final manuscript is placed back on the shelf, the age of the monk copyist officially comes to an end. The press has risen, and the work that once took hours, days, and years to complete can now be done in a fraction of the time. The world has embraced the mechanical age, and with it the rapid spread of knowledge and ideas. But despite the rise of technology, the core of the monk copyist's legacy remains unchanged. In every printed book, in every online article, in every academic journal, the spirit of the monk copyist lives on. Their mission was not just to transcribe the words of others, but to preserve knowledge for future generations, to ensure that the wisdom of the past would be passed on to those who came after. The monks who worked tirelessly in the dimly lit scriptoriums may not have known it at the time, but they were laying the groundwork for a revolution in human thought. Their labor created the foundation upon which modern education, scientific discovery, and intellectual freedom would be built. They were the silent architects of the modern world. As you leave the scriptorium for the final time, you can't help but feel a deep sense of pride. Your work, the work of all the monks who came before you, has not been in vain. It is not simply the written word that endures. It is the idea behind it. The idea that knowledge is worth preserving, worth sharing, and worth passing on to those who will build upon it. The monk copyist's work is a part of humanity's shared story. A story that stretches across time, from the ancient texts of Greece and Rome to the modern age of digital information. The labor may have ended in the scriptorium, but its influence will never fade. The monk's work continues to shape the way we learn, think, and live. From the pages of books to the pixels of screens, their legacy lives on in every word, every idea, and every discovery. In the end, the work of the monk copyist was not just about writing. It was about perpetuating knowledge, ensuring that the wisdom of the past would not be lost. The printing press may have brought about a new era, but it could never replace the devotion, the sacrifice, and the spiritual connection that was embedded in the work of the monk copyist. The world may have changed, but the pursuit of knowledge remains as vital as ever. And so, as you step out into the world, leaving the scriptorium behind, you realize that the work of the monk copyist, like the knowledge it preserved, will never truly end. It will continue to evolve, to adapt, and to inspire generations to come. The world has changed, but the spirit of the monk copyist endures in every book, every classroom, and every mind that seeks to understand the world. The story of the monk copyist is, in truth, the story of humanity itself, a story of learning, of growth, and of an unbreakable desire to pass on what we know to those who will come after. The candles burn low, and the ink is dry. The scriptorium is empty, but the story is far from over. The legacy of the monk copyist lives on in every classroom, every book, every institution of learning. The work of the past has given rise to the modern world, and the work of today will pave the way for the future. And as the night settles in, one thing is clear: the pursuit of knowledge never ends. It's passed from hand to hand, from mind to mind, forever onward.